Tragedy strikes a peaceful Florida community when a young father is gunned down in his home.
Appeared to be some type of gunshot wound to the head.
We have to believe it's somehow related to sex or intimacy because we have an unused condom laying on the floor.
In search of justice, investigators must open a Pandora's box into the victim's love life.
The ex-girlfriend, they just back and forth, back and forth.
But it was all out of anger, because deep down inside, I love this dude with all my heart.
As the blame shifts between suspects, authorities will uncover a disturbing conspiracy of revenge, fueled by a deadly romance.
I didn't know they was gonna go down like this.
It wasn't my idea, man.
She identified the target. She was the one that had the motive.
I'm like, what the is he going on?
It's a combination of wanting revenge and financial gain.
It was destined that somebody was going to die that day.
Quick. And boom.
In the heart of Florida's Big Bend lies the state capital of Tallahassee.
We do have the Capitol here. We also have several universities here. So it's kind of got a small town feel, but there's also quite a lot going on.
On July 12, 2005, one family has grown increasingly alarmed about the whereabouts of 24-year-old Mylan Lowe.
They had spent all afternoon trying to make calls to get a hold of Mylan. Hadn't had any contact with him. They grew more and more concerned.
Mylan's mother called me and had been calling Mylan that morning. And she told me, she said, "Robert, I am going to go over to Mylan's apartment." She took one of Mylan's good friends with her, Tim.
They tried to make entry. Ultimately, didn't have any contact.
She called me when she got there. She said, "Robert, I've called the landlord, and he says he has another key, but I'm tired of waiting on it."
They finally tried to find their way in and ultimately were able to jimmy the door and go inside.
I heard her scream and dropped the phone. I knew something was wrong with my baby. I knew something was wrong with my baby boy. Tim picked the phone up and he said, "Mr. Robert, we found Mylan. He's not breathing."
Mr. Lowe had very obvious head trauma. His head was in a pool of blood.
Mylan's friend immediately calls 911.
They dispatched patrol officers, and once patrol officers got there, they could see, Mylan laying on the floor, kind of in a semi-fetal position. It was obvious that he had some trauma about his head, and clearly he had deceased. I was on call for the homicide unit and responded to the scene.
When law enforcement arrived, there was something a little unusual going on at the scene. His mother was present, and she was rummaging through the apartment looking for items.
That's not something you would normally expect to see. That immediately caused some concern for us.
An officer escorts Mylan's mother out of the apartment as detectives begin processing the scene.
We walked into the apartment. I noted that most of the lights were off. Made our way through the apartment and ultimately to Mylan's bedroom. He wasn't wearing any clothing except for a pair of boxer shorts. There were 2 gunshot wounds that the victim had sustained, one to his right cheek and one to the top of his head.
The second wound is the most telling one regarding the motive for this crime, which was to kill, because it's an execution-style contact wound to the top of the head.
You start asking yourself, why would this person be, lying in his bedroom floor in his boxer briefs with a gunshot wound to his head?
That was probably the worst day of my life. My father called me, and my dad was just like, "He's gone, he's gone." And I'm like, "Ooh, like, Pop, calm down," like, "Who? Like, what are you talking about?" And he just said, "Mylan." They said, "He dead." I don't know anybody that didn't like my brother. And I just started screaming like I've never screamed before in my life. Just scream no, and started beating on my steering wheel of my car. All I could do was scream and cry.
Growing up with 6 brothers and sisters, Mylon Lowe had always been the glue that held his family together.
We're a close-knit family, and Mylon was very family-oriented. He was very protective of our family.
Everybody was close to Mylon. He was like the centerpiece of the family. He made everybody laugh.
He was loving, kind, and fun to be around. He always had the biggest smile on his face.
After high school, Mylon moved to Union Springs, Alabama with his father.
Everywhere I went, Mylon came. He came to Alabama and stayed with me for a while.
It just seemed like he was just kind of living life and just, trying to figure what direction he wanted to go.
Mylon also enjoyed an active dating life.
Mylon had a lot of flair about himself. And he was very, very likable.
He was very charming. He was popular amongst the ladies. He didn't seem to have any problems in those areas.
Mylon had a girlfriend up there. He actually brought her down to see me one time for the weekend and stuff. And I could tell that she was really into my brother. I could tell they had something special.
Unfortunately, the relationship didn't last.
We moved back to Florida. When we finally moved back to Tallahassee, he went to work.
He kind of got it together like, okay, it's time to get my own place and be independent here.
He was doing landscaping for the state. They were working in front of the Capitol. He always had good things to say about that job. I think Mylon liked that job very well.
At 23, Mylon's life was moving in a positive direction. In early 2004, he began dating 18-year-old LaToya Henderson, an old friend from the neighborhood.
He was very into LaToya. He liked her a lot.
LaToya was like Mylon. They made you laugh. They had fun together. And they looked like a good couple together. Mylon seemed to have been really fond of her. When Mylon met LaToya, she was pregnant.
When my daughter LaToya got pregnant, the guy that she was pregnant with really wasn't in the picture. So Mylon was there during the whole pregnancy. He jumped right into playing that role as being a dad, and he was part of the family.
He took a very deep liking to this little girl, a daughter of hers. They were making a little family, from what I could see. I was super proud of him. He was doing, in my eyes, he was doing what a man's supposed to do.
Then, Mylon received unexpected news when he heard from his ex-girlfriend in Alabama.
Mylon heard a kid in the background, like a small kid, and asked her who was that. And she said, "It's your son." But, oh man, he was excited. I could see the joy in his face. I could hear it in his voice.
We went to see his son at May. You should have saw the smile on that guy's face, man. Mylon was he was in hog heaven, man.
He was very happy. He was very excited. He was proud, you know what I'm saying? I wouldn't have been surprised if Mylon would have moved to Alabama to be with his child. I could see that as something that my brother would have done.
Unfortunately, he didn't get to make that decision.
Only 2 months later in Tallahassee, Florida, Mylon's journey to fatherhood would be cut short.
He was such a good person. I didn't understand why anyone would want to harm him.
We began to process the scene. The room looked disheveled. It looked like it had been gone through. Some dresser drawers were still left open.
There were several items scattered about the bedroom, shoe boxes, what have you.
We also discovered that there was a torn condom wrapper, but also an unused condom close to his body that immediately caused some concern for us as to what had transpired right before he died.
The evidence on the scene, particularly the condom, certainly suggests that Mr. Lowe was interrupted in the midst of some type of sexual encounter when he was killed.
Coming up, an unexpected witness comes forward with surprising information.
But Cabby watches her walk up the stairs and is met by the door opening.
When I called, I heard a girl voice in the background.
It's very important to identify who this female was.
In Tallahassee, Florida, authorities are investigating the shooting death of Mylan Lowe after his mother and friend found him dead in his apartment on July 12, 2005.
When police arrived on scene, Mylan's mother, she was observed kind of looking underneath the bed near where her son was lying. And she had retrieved a shoebox and ultimately put that shoebox in her vehicle outside when she left the apartment.
The main concern is, why is she taking these items?
Investigators approach Mylan's mother and press her about her actions.
She was attempting to remove any items that might have reflected negatively on her son.
She opened up her trunk. She showed Investigator Maltese a shoebox. I believe it contained a small amount of cash and a small amount of drugs.
That definitely wasn't the wisest thing to do, but she's a mother, and in her mind, she wanted to protect her cub.
Mylan Lowe's mother was also aware that he had a .40 caliber firearm, and she was looking for that gun.
He had purchased the gun legally, but she couldn't find the gun that Mylan owned. They couldn't find Mylan's cell phone. They couldn't find his wallet, tennis shoes, I think, and some jewelry that they couldn't account for that he usually wears that wasn't visible on his body.
So there's possibility it could have been a home invasion robbery. We couldn't rule anything out.
To help piece together a timeline, investigators ask Mylan's mother when she last saw him.
Let's go back to yesterday, Monday morning. What's going on? Do you have any contact with him Monday?
He was at my house Sunday. I think his axe on his truck broke.
Mylan Lowe's mother indicated that she's seen her son the day before. Between 5:30 p.m. and 11 p.m., he had been over at her place working on a truck with his friend Tim.
They fixed the truck? How did Mylan get home?
Tim.
They couldn't get the truck fixed, so Tim transported him back to his house.
When detectives speak with Tim Powell, he confirms he had last seen Mylan the night before.
He was able to verify that he, in fact, had taken the victim home to his apartment.
You dropped him off about midnight, you said?
Right, about midnight, okay. Normally I go up and chill with him a little bit, but I just, because it was already late night, I dropped him off.
Tim says he called Mylan an hour later, but Mylan wasn't alone.
Tim states he heard a female in the background.
A woman that was unknown to Mr. Powell.
So I was like, well, hey, man, go and do your thing, you know what I'm saying? I didn't pay no mind to it.
What time was that you talked to him?
It was at least around 1.
We have to believe that this event is somehow related to an unused condom laying on the floor.
Based on that information, it was important to establish who this female was. Is she going to be a suspect? Is she going to be a witness to what happened afterwards?
Searching for answers, detectives press Tim about Mylan's dating history. Tim reveals that Mylan had recently broken up with his ex-girlfriend, LaToya.
LaToya, the ex-girlfriend, they go through it a lot. They just back and forth, back and forth.
He don't want to mess with her no more, and, he want to go forward with his life, but it didn't seem like she wanted to let him go.
She was in love with him. She couldn't take it when he let her go.
I've just felt like if they were going through a bad time, it'll blow over. But I knew how she get when she get upset.
So we do want to find out, was there anything else going on after they broke up? Could she have something to do with it?
Investigators wrap up their conversation with Tim and turn their attention to the small crowd that has gathered at the scene.
So, although the ex-girlfriend wasn't on scene at the time, the ex-girlfriend's mother was on scene with the ex-girlfriend's sister, Eudrika.
I was in a world of shock myself, like, how in the world could this be? I had seen him maybe 5 days, 4 to 5 days. It was just a lot of crying, a lot of emotions that went on.
Bridget and Eudrika don't know where LaToya is, but they offer to help investigators any way they can.
They agreed to come up to the station just to provide a statement, any information they might be able to give us.
I wanted to talk to Eudrika. We figured with LaToya being in a tumultuous relationship with the victim, she might be able to give us information on her sister.
Udrika was very agreeable to talk.
I've been known about 5 years. I met him in my grandma's neighborhood. Him and my sister was real close. My sister have a 9-month-old daughter. And he did everything for my niece. He bought all her clothes and shoes. He raised her.
Udrika seemed very upset with what had happened. She was concerned about her sister, how she would react to this incident.
They just broke up like 3 weeks ago because Mylan's sister told her brother that my sister is messing around on her.
But it's not true?
No, that's not true, sir. And they got into it.
There were some misunderstandings about who was with who and innuendos that LaToya was with another guy, and Mylan didn't want nothing to do with that, but LaToya kept coming back saying that he misunderstood what was going on with her.
According to Udrika, an incident between Mylan and LaToya a few weeks prior got particularly heated.
They had gotten into an argument.
So we was over there, and she was knocking on the door. So he opened up the window, and he said, "You come over here to start some bull." And he said, "I'm not going to let you in my house, Toy."
He didn't want to have a conversation with her. And back then, during that time, when she's mad, she's really mad.
All kind of bitches. And whores. So my sister got mad, and she took a pocket knife, and she flashed all the tires. Yeah.
She cut him?
No, she stabbed him, and they blew out. And then she got in the car, and we left.
When considering who might have a reason to want Mylan Lowe dead, LaToya Henderson was certainly going to make that list.
As soon as that interview with Udrika was over, we thought we were going down the right path.
Less than 24 hours into Mylan Lowe's murder investigation, authorities in Tallahassee, Florida have a promising lead. According to 17-year-old Udrika Andrews, Mylan had recently broken up with her sister, LaToya.
She potentially had a motive to want to bring harm to him based on their bad breakup.
We were able to contact her and have her come up to the station for an interview.
I was broken because the man I love is dead. It's like, this can't be real. This can't be real. They asked me about our relationship, how it was.
You started dating about 1.5 years ago?
Right. About 4 or 5 months into my pregnancy, we started dating. From there, it was fine. Everything was fine until he moved into this apartment where he at now. It just seemed like everything just started going downhill.
She was honest with, the relationship she had had with Mylan, how it ended, including the fact that, she had slashed 4 tires on his vehicle.
So I fantasized, but it was all out of anger, because deep down inside, I promise you, I love this dude with all my heart.
When asked if Mylan had problems with anyone, LaToya doesn't believe that he had any enemies.
Nobody want to hurt that boy. That boy kept a smile on his face every day, all day.
When we asked when's the last time he had contact with Mylan, and then she would say, well, I talked to him last night.
I called him because the police was in Broward, and Lowe is a drug dealer. So whenever I seen the police coming his way, I called him and let him know, you need to get right. Don't be out here speeding. Don't be out here doing such. He was like, I thank you for letting me know about the police. He was like, I'm finna go ahead and lay down and go to sleep. I gotta go to work in the morning. It's like, I'll call you on my lunch break. Even though we was beefing with each other, he still would call me on his lunch break. He never meant to call me on his lunch break.
We didn't ask her any direct questions if she was involved, but she provided us with alibi information.
She indicates that she was out with friends the night that Mr. Lowe was killed.
The information she gave was that she was not near Mylan Lowe the night that he died, but that she had had contact with him over the phone. both by text and a phone call, but that she was with friends that she provided the names of that we could talk to and corroborate her information.
We were able to track down these friends of hers, and they were all able to confirm that LaToya wasn't near the apartment during the hours in question.
So while she was a person of interest, she did seem to be doing all the right things to cooperate with law enforcement and give them the information they needed to exclude her as a suspect.
I couldn't even understand, I couldn't grasp it. There's no possible way LaToya did this.
Investigators focus on LaToya's allegation that Mylan was a small-time drug dealer.
So if he's engaged in drug activity, there's someone that might have been trying to rob him or steal drugs from him or have had a deal with him that went bad.
A background check doesn't indicate Mylan had recently crossed paths with any criminals.
He dabbled in a little bit of dope, but he was not someone that we had any contact with from a law enforcement standpoint.
He seemed to be small time, only really dealing to friends, people he knew, so that lead just really didn't pan out.
Having hit another dead end, investigators are strapped for leads. But on the evening of July 13th, they receive a game-changing tip from a surprising source.
I received a call from a local taxicab driver.
He had learned of the homicide involving Mylan the night before. It was on the news. And what he thought was odd was the location of the homicide. And he said, I took a fare over there.
The cabbie indicated that he, in fact, had driven a man and a woman to that very residence on the night of the murder.
So based on the information that he was giving us, we asked him to come to the station for an interview.
You said you picked up a fare. It was a guy named D. And do you remember about what time you were sent?
I said the car came between 11:45 and 12:05.
What stuck out in his mind is that they wanted to go to the location of the homicide scene. And prior to getting there, the female asked what he assumed was her boyfriend to get out a couple blocks early.
When he was coming out of the cab, she asked him, do you know where the apartment at?
And he said, yeah, I'm good, we're straight. So, close the door. He's on his own on this little side street, which is about 0.2 of a mile from where Mylan lives.
So the taxicab driver proceeds to an apartment around the corner. When he describes the location, I pull up a map of the location on my computer, and he was able to identify the victim's apartment.
Before she got in the cab, she called a person to sit them down and said, "I'm getting out of the cab."
But cabbie watches her walk up the stairs and is met by the door opening to apartment E. Now we're getting somewhere.
It's very important to identify who D and this female was, because there's a good chance that they were involved in what had happened. The information that he gave us was a big leap into solving this crime.
The cab company had records indicating that the person that solicited the cab that night did so by phone, and that person left a name. And the name was Drek, D-R-E-K.
When we cross-referenced the information from the taxi company, it was determined that the phone number was Udrika's phone number.
His ex-girlfriend's sister. And it shocked me.
Coming up, a startling claim turns the case on its head.
She gets a little nervous as this thing is starting to progress because he's already ripped the condom open.
When he came in the room, she scared me.
Thanks to a tip from a local cab driver, Tallahassee police have identified LaToya Henderson's younger sister, Udrika Andrews, as the woman seen entering Mylan Lowe's apartment on the night of his death.
I mean, based on that information, we felt that Udrika was at the crime scene. The taxi cab driver said he knows the male to be, quote-unquote, D. based on prior interactions he's had with them.
So law enforcement is interested in learning who D is.
When we did the utilities check on the address where he picked up the couple from, the utilities had the primary owner as a Danny Brown, the 21-year-old male that lived in that apartment.
So we got a picture of Danny Brown from CJIS, Criminal Justice Information System. The cabbie knows this guy that was in the car as D. We show him a picture of it, and he said, yeah, that's him.
While police begin looking for the couple, investigators reach out to Udrika's parents in hopes of learning more about Udrika and Danny. They speak first with Udrika's father, Ulysses.
Udrika's father worked for the city, and I would consider myself a friend of Udrika's father.
They hired me at the police department for a maintenance position. Once I started working there, I used to take Udrika to work with me. And JD and Tom, we all became real good friends. They watched Drake grow up. She's a caring person. She'll help anybody if it's within her power. She's a comedian like me, just like to make people smile, make people laugh.
We were able to corroborate the fact that Danny Brown and Udrika Andrews had been involved in a romantic relationship.
Udrika was still a juvenile. She was 17. I mean, he was 21.
They hid it from me for a long time because, I didn't play that. There wasn't no boyfriend. But then they finally came around and told me they was dating. And every time I came around, he was a nice fella. They seemed it to be okay to me, even though I didn't want to accept it. The further I knew, she met him around Bridget House because a lot of the kids, I guess, used to come around there, and that's how him and Drake ended up talking.
We find out that Udrika moved in with him several months prior. Based on the information the taxi cab driver provided us, that gave us enough information for probable cause for a search warrant on the residence.
We were looking for items of evidence related to the crime. My hope was that Danny would be there, but the apartment was empty, nobody was there.
Upon the search of that residence, some very important items were found, including Mylan Lowe's cell phone, which was stuffed in between the mattress and box springs, and also some property belonging to the victim, including some tennis shoes and some jewelry.
During the course of that execution of the search warrant, a neighbor came over and said, hey, I'll just let you know, I got a call from Danny Brown.
He wanted the neighbor to go over to the laundry area of the place where they lived and retrieve something out of the rafters.
My guess is he probably started to come home to the apartment and realized it's not a good idea because all the police are there. I write another search warrant for that particular laundry room of the apartment, and we recover a gun. It was stuffed up into the rafters. We ran the serial number, and it turns out it's Mylan Lowe's gun that was taken from his apartment.
With an abundance of evidence recovered from their home, Tallahassee police ramp up their efforts to locate the missing couple, Udrika Andrews and Danny Brown. That same day, investigators receive unexpected news.
We learned that Udrika's in juvenile detention center for some type of disorderly conduct charges.
It was for an unrelated incident involving an argument with a neighbor.
I don't know who called the officers, but the police came and pulled Udrika out of her house.
Investigators race to the detention center to question Udrika and ask her to elaborate on her relationship with Danny Brown.
So, how long you got to date?
Since I was 14, about 3 years. We already have engagement. I already have engagement ring. I was already proposed to me and everything.
When the conversation shifts to the night of Mylan's murder, Udrika surprisingly admits to being at his apartment.
She was kind of matter-of-fact about her contact with Mylan. She wanted to buy some marijuana.
Give him any money?
Yeah, $25, but I mean, that's it. He opened up the door for me, and I walked out, and that's the last time I see him, so.
Sherry, listen to me. We have stuff that has indicated that you're not being honest. Okay, and there's a lot that's been going on the last couple of days that you don't know. You don't know what we know. Okay?
When we confronted her with all the evidence against her, she pretty much had that droopy shoulder moment where all the weight of the previous days was piling up and now she could finally release it.
Udrika tells investigators that after Mylan broke up with her sister LaToya, Udrika began thinking of ways to get back at him.
Lo had been dogging my sister. Every time he get mad at my sister, he's standing out on calling her bitches and whores. So I was like, it'd be good somebody beat his ass up. And I know he way bigger than him. So I know he can beat him up probably.
She approached Danny and said, hey, I got an idea how we can make some money.
The motive was twofold. It was both to rob Mr. Lowe because Ms. Andrews was aware he had property of value and money inside, and also to teach him a lesson for disrespecting her sister.
Her plan was to come on to him, saying that she had had problems with her boyfriend, that she liked him a lot and wanted to have sex with him.
She indicates she did this, and Mr. Lowe readily agreed. At that point, the plan was for her to go into the residence first to begin to engage Mr. Lowe in such a way that he would be relaxed or off guard. And at that point, her boyfriend, Danny Brown, would burst into the residence with a firearm, and that's when the robbery and or beating was to take place.
Udrika confirms that she arrived at Mylan's apartment around midnight on July 12.
Udrika and Mylan got into the bedroom. She notices that Mylan's handgun is sitting on the dresser.
I had a gun with some clips, and I made him put it in the drawer.
And then what?
She indicates that Mr. Lowe received a phone call from Mr. Powell, and that gave her the sort of break to be able to send the signal by phone to Danny Brown that it was time to enter.
She gets a little nervous as this thing is starting to progress because Mylan's stripped down. You know, he's already ripped the condom open. The next thing she knows, Danny comes through the room with his own gun.
When he came in the room, like, he scared me because he came in there with a gun. I'm like, what the f*** is he doing? He's supposed to be jumping overboard fighting me. So no one's going to get his gun.
Mylan goes to reach for the drawer where he had just put his gun.
Quick, then, boom.
Danny shoots twice.
He was supposed to wild help, but I didn't know he was gonna shoot him. I didn't know they was gonna go down like that.
Udrika Andrews indicates that murder was never part of the plan.
Stop me getting scared. I ain't never seen nobody get killed before. I was just sitting there just stuck. He was like, hey, get up. We gotta go.
They started rummaging through the bedroom and the apartment looking for things to take. They took a shoebox that had some tennis shoes in it. They found his wallet. They basically killed a man for $50.
Udrika Andrews was arrested for the murder of Mylan Lowe, but Danny Brown was still wanted. His whereabouts were unknown.
I hear it come over the radio that Udrika admitted to being a part of the murder. And it's just like everything just went blank. Like, what? What do you mean?
I couldn't believe that. That ripped me apart.
Law enforcement was looking for Danny Brown for several days.
Nobody knew where he was, period. I mean, he was all over the news. Everything was all over the TV.
My concern with Danny turning himself in was not how long it would take, it was just how it would end. Would he do the right thing and give up voluntarily? Would he turn this into, more of a violent situation?
Five days into the murder investigation of Mylan Lowe, Tallahassee police have arrested 17-year-old Udrika Andrews. But her boyfriend and the alleged trigger man, Danny Brown, remains at large.
On the 17th of July, our agency forwarded a tip to the Gaston County Sheriff's Office about possible whereabouts of Danny Brown.
I'm the one that called the hotline to tell them where he was at that time. He called me that Sunday morning, and his exact words was that he was sorry about what he had done.
Danny Brown was at a residence in Gaston County, which is the next county west of where we are.
Once law enforcement arrived at the residence in Gadsden County, Danny Brown gave up without a fight.
Literally walked out of the house and walked to the patrol car and was taken into custody.
We interviewed Mr. Brown to get his side of the story, basically.
He kind of did the whole, I wasn't even over there. I don't have anything to do with it. And it lasted for, maybe a minute or so, and then he finally just said it.
It wasn't my idea. Okay. Whose idea was it? It was the Drika idea.
As Danny opens up to detectives, he outlines several discrepancies in Udrika's statement.
One of which was he indicates that when he entered the apartment, he did not have his gun ready to go, as indicated by Udrika Andrews, that his gun was put away.
Come into the room. He's over here.
Yeah, we get into his front.
Danny tried to make it seem like there was a physical confrontation as soon as he came into the room.
You got your gun?
Yeah, it's in the back.
All right. You pull it out?
Yeah, when I see him reaching.
Danny told them Lowe was heading towards the location where his firearm was located, and that Danny then pulled his gun out. He and Lowe got into a scuffle.
He felt like he was just merely trying to defend himself. That's why he shot him.
But this story does not comport with the scientific evidence in the case at all. The evidence to the contrary indicates that Mylon Lowe was murdered execution style from someone standing over him while he was on the ground.
Towards the end of the interview, I asked him if he had anything else to say. Did he want to make any statement?
I really didn't mean for it to happen like this, and I'm truly sorry.
So both parties, Danny Brown and Udrika Andrews, were charged with both first-degree murder and the robbery of Mylon Lowe.
I was really shocked. I had no idea that it was LaToya's sister and her boyfriend. I really had no idea. But it was a relief to know that they found out who had killed my son.
Udrika Andrews and Danny Brown's joint trial gets underway on January 8, 2007. Despite being a minor during the commission of the crime, Udrika is tried as an adult.
Because of the nature of the evidence, we had to have two separate juries in the courtroom present at one time for each defendant in order to try them together.
The defense that I put forth for Danny was that he was acting in self-defense. His life was in danger, and he took responsive action to defend himself.
Udrika Andrews' defense was that she was very young. She was duped by the older Danny Brown into engaging in what she thought was going to be a relatively minor incident, and which, spiraled out of control. But the state argued they were looking for someone to rob, and he fit the bill because of the secondary motive, which was the bad blood against him over the way he treated Udrika Andrews' sister.
It was a combination of Udrika wanting revenge for how her sister was treated, and Mr. Brown seeing an opportunity to have some kind of financial gain.
Prosecutors argue that Udrika recruited the help of her boyfriend, promising Danny that Mylon's apartment would be flush with drugs and money.
It was her idea. She identified the target. She was the one that had the motive against Mylon Lowe.
Danny was in the position that he would do whatever Udrika asked.
As proof, Danny's defense plays his taped confession for jurors.
Did Udrika tell you to take a gun? Yes. Do you usually carry a gun? No.
I don't think Eudrika Andrews thought this is going to end in a murder. But I think in general, if you're going to bring a gun to do a violent crime, one should anticipate that you better be ready to use it.
She knew they was going to rob him, but Dree also knew if we go over here and rob this boy, we going to have to kill him. Because we not walking out alive if we don't. It's either going to be him or us.
The law in Florida is if you go to do an armed robbery, a murder is a reasonably foreseeable outcome.
I don't know much that Mylon could have done. It was pretty much destined that somebody was going to die that day. That was kind of what the jury determined, that Danny was armed and she knew he was armed.
They was trying to say Drake was the mastermind of all of this. It really hurt me because I couldn't believe my child did something as stupid as that. And I still don't believe that was the case.
She was convicted on all counts, and the same with Danny.
Judge Decker at that time only had one sentence that she could impose, and that was life without parole, which she did.
12 years later, in 2019, Eudrika receives relief for her prison sentence.
For homicide offenses committed by juveniles, the law has changed in the state of Florida since Eudrika Andrews got her life sentence. Juvenile offenders are to be given an opportunity of release, and ultimately the judge elected to sentence her to 45 years in prison.
She can help someone before they go down that road, is try to speak with these young people, help them to not end up in the same situation. And I'm really praying that's what she do when she do get out.
I have a marvelous child that's coming out. A child that is going to be ready for society, better than she was before she went in.
I lost my sister. I lost my man. I'm just kind of like broken. And even though my sister did what she did, I do feel like you deserve another chance.
In 45 years, I won't be able to hug my brother. I miss my brother. I'll never get another one back, you know. You don't get to come back after 45 years.
Mylon was 24 years old. He was just figuring out life. He just found his kid. You know, his life was just beginning.
He took away something I just didn't know how to go on without. You know? And I'm still having trouble going on without it sometimes.
On the morning of July 6th, Sill 1973, 11-year-old Linda and O'Keefe left her family's home in Newport Beach, California, to attend a summer recreation program at Corona Del Mar Elementary School. It was a warm Friday during the Independence Day holiday week, and the neighborhood appeared quiet and familiar. Linda had made the short walk to school many times before. According to investigators, she participated in the morning activities and was last reliably seen leaving the campus shortly before noon. She began walking home along the route she knew well. She never arrived. When Linda failed to return home, concern quickly turned into alarm. Her family searched nearby streets and contacted authorities. Police officers, firefighters, volunteers, and neighbors joined an expanding search that covered residential neighborhoods, parks, vacant lots, and nearby roads. As the hours passed without any sign of the missing child, investigators increasingly believed that something far more serious than a simple disappearance had occurred. The investigation began immediately. Detectives interviewed classmates, teachers, residents, and motorists who had been in the area that morning. Every reported sighting was documented and compared against a developing timeline. Several witnesses recalled seeing Linda walking alone after leaving school, but none could say with certainty what happened during the critical moments that followed. The apparent lack of eyewitnesses to the abduction created one of the investigation's greatest challenges from the very beginning. The following day, July 7th, Linda's body was discovered in a remote area near Back Bay Drive, several miles from where she had last been seen. The discovery transformed a missing child investigation into a homicide investigation. The crime scene was carefully examined, and investigators collected every piece of physical evidence available using the forensic techniques of the early 1970s. Although the evidence suggested that Linda had been abducted by a stranger before being murdered, identifying the person responsible proved far more difficult. The murder shocked Newport Beach. Residents struggled to understand how an 11-year-old girl could disappear in broad daylight while walking home from a familiar neighborhood school. Parents changed daily routines, accompanied their children on walks, and warned them never to travel alone. The case received widespread media attention throughout Southern California, generating hundreds of tips from members of the public. Investigators pursued numerous leads during the first weeks of the case. Witness statements were reviewed repeatedly. Vehicles reported near the school were traced whenever possible, and individuals with histories of violent crime were examined. Detectives also compared Linda's murder with other crimes committed in California during that period, searching for similarities that might reveal a pattern or identify a serial offender. Despite these efforts, no suspect could be conclusively linked to the crime. As the years passed, the investigation remained active but unsolved. Detectives revisited the evidence whenever advances in forensic science offered new opportunities. Physical evidence collected in 1973 was preserved with the hope that future technology might reveal information unavailable at the time. The case became one of Orange County's longest-running, unsolved child homicide investigations. By the late 20th century, DNA analysis had transformed criminal investigations across the United States. Biological evidence from Linda O'Keefe's case was re-examined using modern laboratory methods. Investigators successfully developed a DNA profile believed to belong to the perpetrator. Although this represented a significant scientific breakthrough, searching traditional law enforcement DNA databases failed to identify a matching individual. Rather than closing the file, successive generations of detectives continued working the case. New investigators carefully reviewed original reports, interviewed surviving witnesses when possible, and reconstructed events using both historical records and modern investigative techniques. Their work reflected an understanding shared by many cold case investigators. Preserving evidence and maintaining detailed records could eventually allow future technology to solve crimes that once seemed impossible. In the 2010 a relatively new investigative approach began producing remarkable results in previously unsolved homicide cases. Known as investigative genetic genealogy, the method combines forensic DNA analysis with publicly available genealogical information to identify individuals through distant family relationships. After gaining national attention in several major cold cases, investigators assigned to Linda O'Keefe's murder sought to determine whether the same approach could finally identify the person responsible. Specialists generated a genetic profile from the preserved forensic evidence and, following applicable legal procedures, used genealogical analysis to identify possible family connections. Genealogists gradually constructed family trees, eliminating branches that could not fit the available evidence while narrowing their focus to individuals whose age, location, and history aligned with the investigation. The process required months of meticulous research and collaboration between detectives, forensic scientists, and genealogy experts. Ultimately, investigators focused on one man, James Allen Neal. Neal had lived in Southern California during the relevant period and had died in 2014, years before the genealogy investigation identified him. Detectives obtained a reference DNA sample from preserved medical specimens associated with Neal. Independent laboratory testing concluded that the DNA matched the biological evidence recovered from Linda O'Keefe's homicide. On February 21, 2020, the Newport Beach Police Department publicly announced that investigators had identified James Allen Neal as Linda O'Keefe's killer, Because Neil had died several years earlier, he could not be arrested or prosecuted. Nevertheless, the announcement marked the conclusion of an investigation that had remained unresolved for nearly 47 years. Authorities emphasized that the identification resulted from the preservation of forensic evidence, advances in DNA science, and the application of investigative genetic genealogy. For Linda O'Keefe's family, no announcement could undo the events of July 1973. Yet identifying the perpetrator answered a question that had remained unresolved for almost half a century. The case also became a notable example of how modern forensic science can resolve decades-old investigations, provided that evidence has been carefully preserved and investigators continue searching for answers long after public attention has faded. For years after the murder of Linda O'Keefe, investigators with the Newport Beach Police Department continued to examine the evidence collected in July 1973. Although the initial investigation generated numerous interviews and tips, no suspect could be identified with sufficient evidence to support prosecution. Like many homicide investigations of that era, the case remained open, with detectives periodically reviewing witness statements, physical evidence, and investigative reports in the hope that new information or advances in forensic science would provide a breakthrough. One of the most significant factors in the longevity of the investigation was the preservation of physical evidence. Although forensic DNA analysis did not exist as an investigative tool in 1973, investigators carefully retained biological evidence recovered during the homicide investigation. As laboratory technology advanced over the following decades, that evidence was re-examined using increasingly sophisticated methods. Scientists were eventually able to develop a DNA profile believed to belong to the perpetrator. The creation of that profile represented an important milestone, but it did not immediately solve the case. Detectives searched traditional law enforcement DNA databases, including those containing profiles from convicted offenders and other qualifying individuals. No matching profile was identified. This outcome indicated that the person responsible had either never been required to submit DNA to those databases or was otherwise absent from them. During the 2010s, a new investigative approach began changing the landscape of cold case investigations in the United States. Investigative genetic genealogy combined forensic DNA analysis with genealogical research to identify unknown individuals through their biological relatives. Instead of searching only criminal justice databases, investigators worked with specialists to compare an unknown DNA profile against publicly available genealogy resources, where permitted under applicable policies and legal requirements. By identifying distant relatives and reconstructing family trees, investigators could gradually narrow the field of potential suspects. After this method proved successful in several other cold cases, detectives assigned to Linda O'Keefe's investigation decided to determine whether the preserved DNA evidence from 1973 could be analyzed using the same approach. Specialists extracted and prepared the forensic DNA, generating a profile suitable for genealogical comparison. Professional genealogists then began the time-consuming process of examining potential family relationships suggested by the available genetic data. Building family trees required careful examination of historical records, including birth certificates, marriage records, census information, newspaper archives, obituaries, and other publicly available documents. Every potential branch of a family had to be evaluated and either supported or eliminated using independent evidence. The process often required months of research before investigators could focus on a single individual whose age, location, and life history were consistent with the available evidence. As the genealogical investigation progressed, one name emerged repeatedly: James Allen Neal. Neal had lived in Southern California during the period in which Linda O'Keefe was abducted and murdered. Investigators began reviewing his background to determine whether the available evidence supported additional inquiry. Because Neal had died in 2014, detectives could not interview him or obtain a direct reference sample through conventional means. Instead, investigators sought legally available biological material that could be compared with the forensic DNA profile developed from the crime scene evidence. According to public statements released by investigators, preserved medical specimens associated with Neal were ultimately obtained and submitted for laboratory testing. Independent forensic analysis concluded that the DNA profile from those specimens matched the biological evidence collected during the 1973 homicide investigation. The identification provided investigators with scientific evidence linking Neal to the murder of Linda O'Keefe. On February 21, SIL 2020, the Newport Beach Police Department publicly announced the results of the investigation. Officials explained that advances in forensic DNA technology, combined with investigative genetic genealogy and the careful preservation of evidence over nearly 5 decades, had allowed detectives to identify James Allen Neal as the individual responsible for Linda O'Keefe's murder. Because Neal had died years earlier, no criminal prosecution was possible. Investigators emphasized that the resolution of the case reflected decades of work by multiple generations of detectives, forensic scientists, laboratory personnel, and genealogists. Officers who had originally worked the case in the 1970s had long since retired, yet the evidence they preserved remained essential to solving the investigation many years later. Modern detectives built upon that foundation by applying scientific methods that had not existed when the crime occurred. The identification also demonstrated the growing importance of investigative genetic genealogy in cold case investigations. While traditional DNA database searches depend on the presence of the offender's profile, genealogical analysis can identify previously unknown suspects by examining relationships among biological relatives. Since the late 2010s, this approach has contributed to the resolution of numerous homicide and sexual assault investigations that had remained unsolved for decades. For Linda O'Keefe's surviving family members, the announcement answered a question that had remained unresolved since July 1973. Although no prosecution could occur because James Allen Neal had died, investigators stated that the available evidence established his responsibility for the crime. The conclusion marked the end of one of Orange County's longest-running homicide investigations and illustrated how persistent investigative work, combined with advances in forensic science, can resolve cases long after they first appeared unsolvable. Investigative genetic genealogy, e.g., is a forensic technique that combines DNA analysis with traditional genealogical research to help identify unknown individuals in criminal investigations. Unlike conventional DNA database searches, which compare a crime scene DNA profile against profiles already held by law enforcement, investigative genetic genealogy seeks to identify biological relatives of an unknown person and then reconstruct family relationships to narrow the search to a single individual. The process begins at the forensic laboratory. Biological evidence recovered from a crime scene such as blood, semen, saliva, or skin cells is first examined to determine whether enough high-quality DNA remains for analysis. In many cold cases, the evidence may have been collected decades earlier, making preservation conditions critically important. Scientists carefully extract DNA from the sample while minimizing contamination and preserving as much genetic material as possible. Traditional forensic DNA profiling focuses on a relatively small number of genetic markers known as short tandem repeats, STS. These markers are highly effective for directly comparing one DNA profile to another in criminal justice databases such as the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, in the United States. However, if the offender has never submitted DNA to such a database, no match will be found. Investigative genetic genealogy requires a different type of genetic information. Scientists generate a much broader DNA profile containing hundreds of thousands of single nucleotide polymorphisms, SEPs. SEP analysis resembles the type of genetic data used by many consumer ancestry and genealogy services. Rather than identifying an individual directly, these markers reveal biological relationships between people even when they are only distant cousins. Once a suitable SUP profile has been produced, investigators work within applicable laws, regulations, and database policies to compare the unknown DNA against genealogy databases that permit law enforcement use under specified conditions. The search rarely identifies a close family member. Instead, it often reveals individuals who share only a small percentage of DNA with the unknown person, perhaps third, fourth, or even fifth cousins. While these distant matches do not identify the suspect themselves, they provide the starting point for genealogical research. Professional forensic genealogists then begin constructing extensive family trees. This stage relies on historical records rather than genetics alone. Researchers examine birth certificates, marriage records, death certificates, census records, military records, immigration documents, newspaper archives, obituaries, cemetery records, and other publicly available sources. The objective is to determine how each genetic match may be related to the unknown individual through common ancestors. As family trees expand, genealogists identify ancestral couples who appear in multiple branches connected to the DNA matches. Descendants of those common ancestors are traced forward through multiple generations. This process can involve thousands of individuals spread across different states or even different countries. Careful documentation is essential because every relationship must be supported by historical records rather than assumptions. At this stage, traditional detective work becomes just as important as genetics. Investigators compare members of the reconstructed family tree against known facts from the case. They consider factors such as age, sex, geographic location, opportunity, and documented life history. Individuals who could not possibly have committed the crime are systematically excluded. As more branches are eliminated, the list of potential candidates becomes increasingly narrow. When investigators identify a person who fits both the genealogical evidence and the known circumstances of the crime, the individual is treated as an investigative lead rather than a confirmed suspect. Additional evidence is required before any conclusion can be reached. Detectives may review historical records, interview witnesses, examine employment histories, compare known residences with the crime location, or determine whether the individual had any connection to the victim or the area where the offense occurred. Before making an arrest or filing criminal charges, investigators seek a direct DNA comparison whenever possible. This reference sample may be obtained through lawful means, depending on the jurisdiction and circumstances. The laboratory then compares the reference DNA with the forensic DNA recovered from the crime scene. It is this direct comparison, not the genealogy research itself, that provides the primary scientific basis for confirming or excluding an individual. Investigative genetic genealogy has proven particularly valuable in cold cases where conventional investigative methods and standard DNA database searches have failed. Since the late 2010s, it has contributed to the identification of suspects in numerous homicide and sexual assault investigations that remained unsolved for decades. In many of these cases, detectives had preserved biological evidence for years without any practical means of identifying the unknown contributor until advances in DNA technology made broader genetic analysis possible. The technique has also prompted important discussions about privacy, ethics, and legal safeguards. Because genealogy databases were originally developed for ancestry research rather than criminal investigations, many service providers have established specific policies governing law enforcement access. Some databases require users to affirmatively opt in before their genetic information can be used in criminal investigations. Investigators are generally expected to comply with applicable laws, court decisions, and database terms of service. And many agencies have adopted formal policies governing the use of investigative genetic genealogy. Experts emphasize that investigative genetic genealogy does not replace conventional police work. Instead, it functions as one component of a broader investigation. Genealogical analysis generates investigative leads, but those leads must be supported by independent evidence, forensic testing, and established legal procedures before charges can be pursued. The approach combines modern genetics with historical research and traditional detective methods, illustrating how advances in science can complement rather than replace established investigative practices. Today, investigative genetic genealogy is regarded as one of the most significant developments in modern forensic science. Its success depends not only on advances in DNA sequencing technology, but also on meticulous evidence preservation, comprehensive historical research, collaboration among forensic scientists, genealogists, detectives, and prosecutors, and careful adherence to legal and ethical standards. As technology continues to evolve, investigators expect the method to remain an important tool for resolving violent crimes that have remained unsolved for many years while balancing the scientific opportunities it provides with ongoing considerations of privacy and public trust. The history of forensic DNA analysis represents one of the most significant scientific revolutions in modern criminal investigation. Before DNA technology emerged, investigators relied primarily on fingerprints, eyewitness testimony, blood typing, hair comparison, fiber analysis, and other forms of physical evidence. While these methods often proved valuable, many lacked the ability to identify a single individual with the level of certainty that DNA profiling would eventually provide. The scientific foundation for DNA evidence dates back to the discovery of the DNA double helix structure by James Watson and Francis Crick in 1953, building on the work of Rosalind Franklin and Maurice Wilkins. Over the following decades, researchers gradually developed a deeper understanding of how genetic information varies from one individual to another. Although every human shares more than 99% of their DNA, small genetic differences provide a powerful means of distinguishing one person from another. A major breakthrough occurred in 1984 when British geneticist Sir Alec Jeffreys developed the first practical method of DNA fingerprinting at the University of Leicester. Jeffreys discovered that certain regions of human DNA varied significantly among individuals, allowing biological samples collected from different sources to be compared with remarkable accuracy. What began as a scientific discovery in genetics quickly attracted the attention of law enforcement agencies around the world. One of the earliest demonstrations of Donna's forensic potential came in England during the mid-1980s. DNA testing was used to both exonerate an innocent suspect and identify the true perpetrator in a double murder investigation. This case established DNA analysis as both an investigative tool and a safeguard against wrongful conviction, illustrating that forensic science could identify offenders while also preventing miscarriages of justice. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, forensic laboratories increasingly adopted DNA profiling. Early methods required relatively large amounts of high-quality biological material and often demanded weeks of laboratory work. Samples that had degraded because of age, environmental exposure, or improper storage frequently could not be analyzed successfully. Even so, DNA evidence rapidly became one of the most reliable forms of scientific identification available to investigators. A second major advance came with the widespread adoption of the polymerase chain reaction, PCR, a laboratory technique capable of copying tiny amounts of DNA into quantities sufficient for analysis. PCR dramatically expanded the range of cases that could benefit from DNA testing. Biological traces that would previously have been considered too small or too degraded could now often be examined successfully. This innovation proved especially valuable in sexual assault investigations and homicide cases where only minute quantities of biological evidence remained. As forensic science progressed through the 1990s, laboratories standardized the use of short tandem repeat, Stanger analysis. Stray profiling examines specific regions of the human genome where short DNA sequences repeat a varying number of times among individuals. By comparing multiple stranger locations, forensic scientists can generate highly discriminating DNA profiles because the probability of two unrelated individuals sharing the same stray profile across numerous markers is extraordinarily low. Stray analysis became the international standard for forensic identification. The development of national DNA databases further transformed criminal investigations. In the United States, the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, enabled laboratories across different jurisdictions to compare DNA profiles from crime scenes with profiles collected from convicted offenders and, in some circumstances, arrested individuals, depending on applicable laws. When a direct match occurred, investigators could rapidly identify suspects who might otherwise have remained unknown. Equally important, DNA databases also linked crimes committed by the same unknown offender across multiple jurisdictions. As laboratory technology improved, scientists learned how to recover DNA from increasingly challenging evidence. Advances in extraction techniques, contamination control, and analytical instruments allowed successful testing of evidence that had been preserved for decades. Improved quality assurance standards also strengthened confidence in laboratory results through rigorous validation, accreditation, and independent review procedures. By the early 21st century, DNA analysis had become an indispensable component of criminal investigations. It was used not only to identify suspects, but also to exclude individuals who had been wrongly accused. Numerous convictions based on less reliable forensic methods were later re-examined using DNA testing, leading to exonerations that highlighted both the power and the limitations of earlier investigative practices. These cases reinforce the importance of scientific evidence, objective laboratory procedures, and continual reassessment of forensic methods. The next major evolution involved moving beyond direct identification toward relationship analysis. Rather than asking whether two DNA profiles belong to the same individual, scientists began examining whether unknown DNA could reveal biological relationships among relatives. This shift required the analysis of hundreds of thousands of genetic markers known as single nucleotide polymorphisms, SUPs, providing far greater information about ancestry and familial connections than traditional stray profiling alone. These advances eventually made investigative genetic genealogy possible. Instead of depending solely on law enforcement DNA databases, investigators could identify distant biological relatives of an unknown individual and reconstruct family trees using historical records. Traditional detective work remained essential throughout the process, but genetics provided a powerful new investigative lead where conventional methods had reached dead ends. Today, forensic DNA analysis continues to evolve through innovations such as next-generation sequencing, improved probabilistic interpretation of complex DNA mixtures, enhanced methods for analyzing highly degraded samples, and increasingly sophisticated bioinformatics tools. At the same time, legal systems and scientific organizations continue to refine standards governing laboratory procedures, expert testimony, quality assurance, and the ethical use of genetic information. The evolution of forensic DNA analysis demonstrates how scientific progress can fundamentally reshape criminal investigations. What began as a laboratory discovery in molecular genetics has become an essential component of modern forensic science, enabling investigators to identify unknown victims, exclude innocent individuals, link offenders to multiple crimes, revisit decades-old cold cases, and provide answers that earlier generations of detectives could not have obtained with the technology available at the time. By the beginning of the 21st century, forensic DNA analysis had become an established part of criminal investigations around the world. Yet the technology continued to evolve at a remarkable pace. Improvements in laboratory methods, computational analysis, and molecular biology dramatically increased both the sensitivity and reliability of DNA testing. These advances expanded the range of cases that could benefit from forensic science, particularly those involving degraded, mixed, or decades-old biological evidence. One of the most important developments has been the increasing sensitivity of DNA extraction techniques. Early forensic laboratories often required relatively large, well-preserved biological samples. Today, scientists can frequently obtain usable DNA profiles from extremely small quantities of biological material, sometimes referred to as trace DNA. Such samples may consist of only a few skin cells left behind after a person touches an object. Although trace DNA can provide valuable investigative information, forensic scientists must also consider issues such as transfer mechanisms, contamination, and interpretation, making careful laboratory procedures and contextual analysis essential. Modern laboratories also employ increasingly sophisticated methods for interpreting complex DNA mixtures. Crime scenes often contain biological material from multiple individuals, making analysis considerably more challenging than comparing a single source sample. Statistical software and probabilistic genotyping systems assist forensic scientists in evaluating these mixtures by estimating the likelihood that a particular individual's DNA contributed to the sample. Rather than replacing scientific judgment, these computational tools support analysts in interpreting evidence according to established statistical models and validated laboratory procedures. Another significant advance involves next-generation sequencing, NGS, also known as massively parallel sequencing. Unlike traditional methods that primarily measure the length of DNA fragments, next-generation sequencing examines the precise sequence of nucleotides across numerous regions of the genome simultaneously. This technology has the potential to recover additional genetic information from degraded evidence and may improve the discrimination of closely related DNA profiles in certain situations. Although STRI analysis remains the international standard for routine forensic identification, many laboratories and researchers continue evaluating how next-generation sequencing can complement existing forensic workflows. Researchers have also improved methods for recovering DNA from difficult environmental conditions. Biological evidence exposed to moisture, sunlight, heat, microorganisms, or extended periods of environmental degradation often presents substantial analytical challenges. Advances in extraction chemistry, purification techniques, and sequencing technologies have increased the likelihood of obtaining informative genetic profiles from evidence once considered unsuitable for examination. These improvements have been particularly valuable in historical investigations and long-term cold cases where evidence has been preserved for decades. Alongside laboratory innovations, forensic quality assurance has become increasingly rigorous. Accredited forensic laboratories operate under comprehensive quality management systems that include standardized operating procedures, instrument calibration, proficiency testing, evidence tracking, documentation requirements, and independent technical review. These safeguards are designed to ensure that laboratory conclusions are scientifically reliable, reproducible, and suitable for presentation within judicial proceedings. The interpretation of DNA evidence has likewise become more statistically sophisticated. A DNA profile is not evaluated in isolation. Instead, forensic scientists calculate the probability that another unrelated individual would share the observed genetic characteristics. Population genetics, allele frequency databases, and likelihood ratios provide statistical frameworks that assist courts in understanding the evidentiary significance of DNA findings. Experts generally emphasize that DNA evidence should be interpreted alongside all other available evidence rather than viewed as the sole determinant of investigative conclusions. As DNA technology advanced, the role of forensic databases also expanded. National DNA databases continue to assist investigators by linking crime scenes, identifying repeat offenders whose DNA has been lawfully collected, and connecting cases across different jurisdictions. International cooperation has further enhanced the ability of investigators to compare DNA information in cross-border criminal investigations while operating within applicable legal frameworks and privacy protections established by participating countries. The emergence of investigative genetic genealogy introduced an additional dimension to forensic science by combining molecular genetics with historical genealogical research. Rather than replacing traditional straight-through profiling, this approach supplements existing investigative methods when conventional database searches fail to identify a suspect. It illustrates how multiple scientific disciplines, including genetics, genealogy, bioinformatics, archival research, and criminal investigation can work together to generate investigative leads in previously unresolved cases. These technological advances have also prompted important ethical and legal discussions. The increased ability to analyze genetic information requires careful consideration of privacy rights, informed consent, data security, and proportional law enforcement use. Many professional organizations have published guidance governing forensic DNA practices, while legislators and courts continue refining the legal standards that regulate emerging technologies. Maintaining public confidence requires transparency, scientific rigor, and clear policies regarding when and how advanced genetic methods may be employed. Looking toward the future, researchers continue exploring methods that may further improve forensic investigations. Artificial intelligence is being evaluated as a tool for assisting with laboratory quality control, pattern recognition, and data interpretation. Improvements in sequencing technology may enable successful analysis of even more highly degraded samples. Advances in bioinformatics could increase the efficiency of processing large genetic datasets while preserving scientific accuracy and protecting sensitive information. Despite these technological innovations, experts consistently emphasize that forensic DNA analysis is only one component of a comprehensive criminal investigation. DNA evidence must be considered alongside witness testimony, physical evidence, digital evidence, documentary records, crime scene reconstruction, and established investigative procedures. Scientific results answer specific biological questions, but detectives, prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, and juries remain responsible for evaluating the totality of the evidence within the legal system. The evolution of forensic DNA analysis demonstrates the cumulative nature of scientific progress. Discoveries in molecular biology, improvements in laboratory instrumentation, advances in statistical analysis, and the development of robust quality assurance systems have transformed forensic genetics from an experimental technique into one of the most powerful scientific tools available to modern investigators. At the same time, ongoing research, ethical oversight, and continual validation ensure that forensic DNA analysis continues to evolve responsibly, balancing scientific innovation with the legal principles of accuracy, transparency, and fairness. The scientific value of forensic DNA analysis extends beyond generating a genetic profile in the laboratory. Equally important is the process by which that evidence is interpreted, documented, verified, and ultimately presented within the legal system. Modern forensic DNA evidence is governed by internationally recognized scientific standards designed to ensure that laboratory findings are accurate, reproducible, and supported by objective statistical analysis. The forensic process begins with evidence collection at the crime scene. Investigators are trained to recognize biological material that may contain DNA, including blood, saliva, semen, hair with tissue attached, skin cells, bones, and teeth. Every item is photographed, documented, packaged separately, and labeled to preserve its integrity. Maintaining a continuous chain of custody is essential. This documented record identifies every individual who handles the evidence from the moment of collection until its presentation in court. Proper chain of custody procedures help demonstrate that the evidence has remained secure and has not been altered or contaminated during transportation or laboratory analysis. Once evidence reaches the forensic laboratory, scientists first determine whether biological material suitable for DNA testing is present. Chemical screening methods and microscopic examination help identify samples that may yield useful genetic information. Because DNA can degrade through exposure to heat, moisture, sunlight, microorganisms, or chemicals, laboratory personnel carefully evaluate the quality and quantity of genetic material before selecting the appropriate analytical method. The next step involves DNA extraction. Scientists isolate genetic material from the biological sample while removing substances that could interfere with later analysis. Modern extraction techniques have become highly efficient, allowing laboratories to recover usable DNA from extremely small or degraded samples that would have been impossible to analyze several decades ago. After extraction, the amount of DNA is measured through a process known as quantification. Determining how much DNA is available allows scientists to select appropriate testing protocols. Samples containing very little DNA may require modified laboratory procedures to maximize the likelihood of obtaining reliable results while minimizing analytical artifacts. DNA amplification follows. The polymerase chain reaction, PCR, enables laboratories to produce millions of copies of specific regions of DNA from only tiny starting amounts. Without PCR, many forensic samples would contain too little genetic material for meaningful examination. The introduction of PCR transformed forensic science by making it possible to analyze minute biological traces recovered from crime scenes. Amplified DNA fragments are then separated and detected using specialized instruments. In routine forensic casework, laboratories generally analyze short tandem repeats, STR-S, regions of DNA that vary considerably among individuals. Each stray marker contains repeating sequences inherited from both biological parents. By examining multiple stray markers simultaneously, forensic scientists create a DNA profile that can be compared with reference samples or database records. Interpreting DNA profiles requires careful statistical analysis. A laboratory does not simply declare that two samples match. Instead, scientists calculate the probability that an unrelated individual selected at random from the population would possess the same DNA profile. These statistical calculations are based on population genetics research involving large reference databases representing diverse populations. The resulting probability estimates help courts evaluate the evidentiary significance of a DNA comparison. Some cases involve straightforward single-source DNA profiles, while others present much greater complexity. Biological evidence collected from crime scenes frequently contains DNA contributed by multiple individuals. Interpreting these mixed profiles requires advanced statistical models and specialized software known as probabilistic genotyping systems. Rather than replacing scientific expertise, these computational tools assist analysts by evaluating numerous possible contributor combinations according to validated mathematical models. Human review remains essential throughout the interpretation process. Quality assurance underpins every stage of forensic DNA analysis. Accredited laboratories operate under rigorous quality management systems that require standardized operating procedures, instrument calibration, reagent validation, proficiency testing, documentation, and independent technical review. Before a laboratory report is issued, another qualified scientist typically reviews the analytical data to verify that the conclusions are supported by the evidence and comply with laboratory protocols. Contamination prevention represents another critical aspect of forensic DNA testing. Laboratories maintain physically separated work areas for different stages of analysis, employ sterile equipment, use protective clothing, and include negative and positive control samples throughout the testing process. These controls help detect contamination or technical problems before analytical conclusions are reported. Once laboratory testing has been completed, forensic scientists prepare detailed reports describing the evidence received, analytical methods employed, quality assurance procedures followed, DNA profiles obtained, and statistical interpretations. Scientific reports are written to allow independent review by other qualified experts and to provide transparency regarding the methods used during examination. When DNA evidence is presented in court, forensic scientists explain both the strengths and limitations of their findings. They distinguish between laboratory observations and investigative conclusions, emphasizing that DNA evidence identifies the source of biological material rather than establishing every circumstance surrounding a criminal event. Courts evaluate DNA evidence alongside witness testimony, physical evidence, digital records, documentary evidence, and other investigative findings. Scientific evidence, therefore, contributes to but does not independently determine the legal outcome of a case. Modern forensic genetics continues to evolve through advances in sequencing technology, computational biology, bioinformatics, and statistical modeling. Researchers are developing improved methods for analyzing highly degraded DNA, interpreting increasingly complex biological mixtures, and enhancing laboratory efficiency while maintaining rigorous scientific standards. As these technologies mature, professional organizations continue updating best practice guidelines to ensure that innovation proceeds alongside careful validation and ethical oversight. The development of forensic DNA analysis illustrates the importance of combining scientific precision with legal safeguards. Accurate laboratory procedures, transparent documentation, independent verification, statistical interpretation, and judicial scrutiny all contribute to the reliability of DNA evidence. Together, these elements have made forensic genetics one of the most influential scientific disciplines in modern criminal justice, while reinforcing the principle that scientific conclusions must always be supported by validated methods, careful documentation, and objective evaluation. For much of the 20th century, homicide investigations that remained unsolved for months or years often faced diminishing prospects for resolution. Detectives were reassigned to newer cases, witnesses became increasingly difficult to locate, memories faded, and investigative leads gradually disappeared. Although many law enforcement agencies retained the files, relatively few had dedicated personnel whose sole responsibility was revisiting unresolved violent crimes. As a result, thousands of homicide investigations remained technically open but received only limited attention once the initial investigative effort had concluded. The concept of the modern cold case unit emerged from a recognition that an unsolved investigation is not necessarily an unsolvable one. Advances in forensic science, improvements in information management, and the growing availability of digital records demonstrated that evidence collected decades earlier could sometimes yield entirely new investigative opportunities. Rather than viewing the passage of time solely as an obstacle, investigators increasingly recognized that time itself could become an advantage as technology evolved. The term cold case generally refers to a criminal investigation that remains unsolved after all readily available investigative leads have been exhausted. Although definitions vary among jurisdictions, a case typically becomes cold when active investigative activity has substantially slowed while the investigation itself remains officially open. Importantly, the designation does not imply abandonment. Instead, it reflects a transition from continuous active investigation to periodic review until new evidence, technological developments, or credible information justify renewed investigative efforts. During the latter decades of the 20th century, several police agencies began establishing specialized units devoted exclusively to reviewing unresolved homicides and long-term missing person investigations. Unlike detectives assigned to active cases, Cold case investigators could devote significant time to carefully examining historical files without the immediate demands associated with newly reported crimes. Their work emphasized patience, meticulous documentation, and a willingness to reconsider investigative assumptions that may have guided the original inquiry. One of the defining characteristics of successful cold case units is the systematic re-examination of evidence. Rather than assuming earlier investigators made mistakes, modern detectives review every available document with fresh perspective. Original witness statements, crime scene photographs, laboratory reports, maps, handwritten notes, physical exhibits, and correspondence are often digitized and organized into searchable databases. This process allows investigators to identify overlooked details, inconsistencies, or relationships that may not have been apparent when records existed only in paper form. Technological progress has fundamentally transformed these reviews. Digital case management systems enable investigators to search thousands of pages of historical documents within seconds. Geographic information systems assist in reconstructing historical crime scenes and travel routes. High-resolution scanning improves the examination of aging photographs and handwritten notes. Artificial intelligence and advanced database technologies increasingly support investigators by organizing large volumes of information, identifying patterns, and linking related cases across multiple jurisdictions. Forensic science has provided perhaps the most dramatic source of renewed investigative opportunity. Evidence collected decades earlier can now be examined using methods unavailable when the crime occurred. Improvements in DNA extraction, amplification, sequencing, and statistical interpretation have enabled laboratories to recover usable genetic profiles from biological material once considered unsuitable for analysis. Enhanced fingerprint processing, digital image enhancement, isotope analysis, forensic anthropology, and advances in trace evidence examination have likewise expanded the range of scientific techniques available to investigators reviewing historical cases. Cold case investigations also benefit from increased cooperation among law enforcement agencies. Criminal activity rarely respects jurisdictional boundaries, and investigators increasingly recognize the importance of sharing information across local, regional, national, and international organizations. Multi-agency task forces allow detectives, forensic scientists, prosecutors, intelligence analysts, and specialized investigators to combine expertise and resources when reviewing particularly complex investigations. National missing person databases, fingerprint systems, DNA databases, and digital information sharing platforms have strengthened this collaborative approach. Public participation has become another important component of many cold case investigations. Media coverage, documentary programs, podcasts, newspaper archives, and official law enforcement appeals have generated renewed public interest in long unsolved crimes. Witnesses who were previously reluctant to speak may become more willing to cooperate after many years have passed. Individuals who initially considered certain information insignificant may later recognize its potential investigative value. At the same time, investigators carefully evaluate newly received information to distinguish credible evidence from speculation or inaccurate recollections. The emergence of dedicated cold case units has also encouraged greater attention to evidence preservation. Modern investigators understand that biological evidence, fingerprints, firearms, digital media, clothing, documents, and numerous other forms of physical evidence may retain investigative value for decades. Evidence storage facilities increasingly employ environmental controls, standardized documentation, and rigorous chain of custody procedures designed to preserve materials for future scientific examination. These practices ensure that advances in forensic technology can be applied to historical evidence when appropriate. Training has likewise evolved significantly. Detectives assigned to cold case units often receive specialized instruction in forensic science, interviewing techniques, digital investigation, genealogy research, intelligence analysis, behavioral analysis, historical records research, and legal developments affecting long-term investigations. Because many cold cases involve evidence collected under earlier legal standards, investigators must understand both historical investigative practices and current procedural requirements when reviewing decades-old files. Cold case units also face distinctive challenges. Witness memories naturally decline over time, physical locations change, records may be incomplete, and some participants, including investigators, witnesses, victims' family members, or potential suspects, may no longer be living. Biological evidence may have deteriorated despite careful preservation, and earlier investigative documentation may reflect standards that differ from those used today. Successful investigators therefore combine historical understanding with modern scientific methods while carefully distinguishing established facts from assumptions that cannot be independently verified. The expansion of cold case units has influenced criminal justice systems beyond homicide investigations. Specialized review teams now examine unresolved sexual assaults, unidentified human remains, long-term missing person cases, and other serious offenses where advances in forensic science or investigative technology may provide new opportunities for identification or resolution. This broader application reflects a growing recognition that systematic case review can benefit many categories of long-term investigations. Today, dedicated cold case units operate in numerous countries and at multiple levels of government. While organizational structures vary, their shared objective remains consistent: to apply contemporary investigative methods, scientific advances, and collaborative expertise to cases that once appeared beyond resolution. Their work demonstrates that the passage of time does not necessarily diminish the value of evidence or the importance of continued investigation. Instead, it highlights how persistence, careful record-keeping, technological innovation, and interdisciplinary cooperation can transform historical investigations into active inquiries once again. The rise of cold case units represents more than an administrative change within law enforcement. It reflects a broader evolution in investigative philosophy, one that recognizes unresolved cases as continuing responsibilities rather than historical records. By preserving evidence, embracing scientific progress, strengthening interagency collaboration, and maintaining long-term commitment to unresolved investigations, modern cold case units have reshaped expectations about what may be possible, even many years after a crime first occurred. The ability to generate a DNA profile from biological evidence transformed forensic science, but the true investigative power of DNA emerged when laboratories began comparing profiles across large, standardized databases. A DNA profile by itself identifies no one unless it can be compared with another profile. DNA databases were developed to provide that capability, allowing investigators to determine whether biological evidence collected from a crime scene matches an individual already included in a legally authorized database or links multiple crime scenes involving the same unknown contributor. Before computerized DNA databases existed, forensic scientists compared evidence manually against individual reference samples collected during specific investigations. This process was time-consuming and limited to known suspects or victims. If investigators had no suspect, a DNA profile often remained scientifically valuable but practically unusable because there was no efficient way to search for a corresponding individual. The development of national DNA databases fundamentally changed this limitation. In the United States, the most widely recognized forensic DNA database system is the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, developed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. CODIS is not a single database, but a software platform that enables accredited forensic laboratories to compare DNA profiles generated by federal, state, and local laboratories. The system was designed to standardize DNA comparisons while allowing participating jurisdictions to maintain control over their own records according to applicable federal and state laws. CODIS operates through several interconnected levels. Local laboratories first upload qualifying DNA profiles into local databases. These records may then be compared at the state level, where multiple laboratories within a state share information. Finally, qualifying profiles can be searched through the National DNA Index System, NDIS, enabling comparisons among participating jurisdictions across the country. This multi-tiered structure allows investigators to identify potential matches that would otherwise remain undetected if agencies operated independently. The system contains several separate indexes designed for different investigative purposes. Crime scene indexes store DNA profiles obtained from unknown contributors associated with criminal investigations. Offender indexes contain profiles collected from individuals whose DNA has been lawfully obtained under applicable legislation. Other indexes may include profiles from unidentified human remains, missing persons, and biological relatives participating in missing person investigations. Keeping these categories distinct helps laboratories conduct appropriate comparisons while preserving the integrity of each investigative purpose. When a new DNA profile is entered into CODIS, automated software compares it against existing records. If the system identifies a potential match, commonly known as a hit, investigators receive notification that further examination is warranted. A database hit is considered an investigative-led rather than definitive proof of identity. Before any investigative or legal action is taken, laboratories conduct additional confirmatory testing, review analytical data, verify statistical calculations, and ensure that all quality assurance requirements have been satisfied. The success of DNA databases depends upon standardized laboratory procedures. Participating laboratories use validated analytical methods, standardized stray markers, rigorous quality assurance programs, proficiency testing, and accreditation requirements to ensure that DNA profiles generated in different laboratories remain directly comparable. These scientific standards are essential because reliable database searches require consistency across thousands of laboratories and millions of DNA profiles. Many countries have established their own national forensic DNA databases. While organizational structures differ, the underlying objective remains similar: enabling investigators to compare DNA profiles obtained during criminal investigations while operating within each nation's legal framework. Countries determine through legislation which categories of individuals may be included, how long records may be retained, and under what circumstances profiles must be removed. These legal approaches vary considerably depending on constitutional principles, privacy laws, and public policy. International cooperation has also expanded significantly. Criminal investigations increasingly involve movement across national borders, requiring collaboration among forensic laboratories in different jurisdictions. Organizations such as Interpol facilitate international law enforcement cooperation by providing mechanisms through which member countries can exchange forensic information and investigative intelligence in accordance with applicable legal agreements. While DNA databases are generally maintained at the national level, international information sharing arrangements assist investigators when cross-border connections arise. Not every DNA profile generated by a forensic laboratory qualifies for entry into a national database. Eligibility depends upon applicable legislation and established laboratory policies. Crime scene evidence, profiles associated with unidentified human remains, and lawfully collected offender samples may qualify under different legal standards. Laboratories carefully review each submission to ensure compliance with governing laws before database entry occurs. Quality assurance remains central to every stage of database operation. Laboratories employ extensive safeguards to minimize contamination, verify analytical accuracy, maintain chain of custody documentation, and protect the integrity of stored genetic information. Independent audits, accreditation programs, Proficiency testing and standardized operating procedures contribute to maintaining public confidence in forensic DNA systems. If an analytical error or administrative discrepancy is identified, established corrective procedures are implemented to preserve database reliability. DNA databases have contributed to the resolution of numerous criminal investigations by identifying unknown offenders, linking serial crimes committed in different jurisdictions, excluding innocent individuals, identifying unidentified human remains, and assisting missing person investigations. They have also highlighted the importance of preserving biological evidence because samples collected years earlier may generate valuable investigative leads when analyzed using improved laboratory methods and compared against expanding databases. Alongside these investigative benefits, DNA databases raise important legal and ethical questions. Policymakers continue to examine issues involving privacy, proportionality, informed consent where applicable, data security, retention periods, and oversight mechanisms. Courts in many countries have considered how constitutional protections and human rights principles apply to the collection, storage, and use of forensic genetic information. As technology advances, legislatures and judicial systems continue refining the legal frameworks governing these databases. The future of forensic DNA databases will likely involve continued technological innovation. Improvements in laboratory automation, bioinformatics, statistical interpretation, and secure information management may further enhance the efficiency and reliability of database searches. At the same time, researchers, legal scholars, and policymakers emphasize that technological capability should be balanced with transparent governance, scientific validation, and respect for individual rights. Today, DNA database systems represent one of the most influential developments in modern forensic science. They demonstrate how standardized laboratory practices, rigorous quality assurance, interagency cooperation, and carefully regulated information sharing can transform isolated biological evidence into meaningful investigative leads. While no database can solve a case on its own, these systems provide investigators with powerful scientific tools that, when combined with traditional detective work and careful legal oversight, continue to play a central role in contemporary criminal investigations around the world. The emergence of forensic genetic genealogy has been widely regarded as one of the most significant developments in criminal investigation during the 21st century. By combining modern DNA analysis with traditional genealogical research, investigators have identified suspects in numerous previously unsolved cases that had resisted conventional investigative methods for decades. Yet the same scientific innovation that has expanded investigative capabilities has also prompted complex discussions involving privacy, ethics, legal authority, and public trust. As forensic genetic genealogy becomes more widely used, governments, courts, scientists, ethicists, and the public continue to examine how the technology should be regulated. Unlike traditional forensic DNA analysis, investigative genetic genealogy generally does not begin with a direct comparison against a law enforcement DNA database. Instead, when permitted by law and database policies, investigators may compare an unknown DNA profile with genetic information voluntarily uploaded by individuals to genealogy services that allow such law enforcement use. These comparisons rarely identify the unknown individual directly. Rather, they reveal possible biological relatives, sometimes separated by several generations, whose family histories may help investigators reconstruct family trees and narrow an investigation to one or more potential candidates. This distinction lies at the center of many ethical discussions. Individuals who upload their DNA to genealogy services often do so for personal reasons such as learning about ancestry, identifying distant relatives, or conducting family history research. Although many genealogy providers clearly describe whether law enforcement may access certain data under specific circumstances, questions remain regarding whether users fully understand how their genetic information might contribute to criminal investigations involving distant relatives they have never met. A second ethical consideration involves the nature of shared genetic information itself. Unlike many forms of personal data, DNA is inherently familial. Every individual shares portions of their genome with parents, siblings, children, cousins, grandparents, and more distant relatives. Consequently, one person's decision to make genetic information available within a genealogy database may indirectly assist investigators in identifying another family member who has never submitted DNA. This characteristic makes genetic information fundamentally different from fingerprints or many other forms of forensic evidence, creating ethical questions that extend beyond individual consent. Privacy considerations therefore occupy a central position in discussions surrounding forensic genealogy. Privacy advocates emphasize that genetic information contains far more than identification markers. Depending on the type of analysis performed, DNA may reveal ancestry, biological relationships, and, in some contexts, health-related information. Although forensic investigations generally use only specific genetic markers relevant to identification and relationship analysis, policies governing data access, storage, and use remain important safeguards for protecting public confidence. In response to these concerns, many genealogy service providers have adopted transparent user policies regarding law enforcement access. Some companies prohibit law enforcement searches entirely, while others permit access only under narrowly defined circumstances. Certain databases require users to actively opt in before their genetic information may be compared during qualifying criminal investigations. These policies reflect an effort to balance public safety with individual autonomy by allowing participants to decide whether their information may contribute to investigative efforts. Legal regulation varies considerably across jurisdictions. In some countries, the use of investigative genetic genealogy remains limited or unavailable because existing legislation does not authorize such investigative methods or because privacy laws impose stricter limitations on genetic data. Other jurisdictions permit carefully regulated use under specified conditions, often restricting the technique to investigations involving homicide, sexual assault, unidentified human remains, or other particularly serious crimes. Legislatures continue evaluating how existing privacy statutes, constitutional protections, and criminal procedure laws should apply as forensic genetics evolves. Professional organizations have also developed guidance concerning best practices for forensic genealogy. These recommendations generally emphasize transparency, scientific validation, qualified personnel, documentation, and careful judicial oversight. Many guidelines recommend that investigators first exhaust conventional investigative methods before employing forensic genealogy. Others emphasize that genealogical analysis should generate investigative leads rather than serve as the sole basis for arrest or prosecution. Another important ethical principle involves proportionality. Many legal scholars argue that more intrusive investigative methods should be reserved for the most serious criminal offenses. Under this principle, the potential benefits of solving violent crimes must be weighed against the broader societal interest in protecting genetic privacy. Restricting forensic genealogy to investigations involving homicide, serial violent offenses, or unidentified human remains represents one approach adopted in several policy discussions to maintain this balance. Accuracy and scientific reliability also remain essential ethical considerations. Genealogical research is a complex process requiring expertise in genetics, historical records, and family history research. Family trees may contain incomplete documentation, historical inaccuracies, adoptions, non-paternity events, or other factors that complicate biological relationships. Consequently, Professional forensic genealogists emphasize that genealogical analysis should always be corroborated through independent investigative evidence and direct forensic DNA comparison before any legal action is considered. Transparency has emerged as another cornerstone of responsible implementation. Public confidence depends upon clear explanations regarding how genetic information is obtained, analyzed, stored, and protected. Many agencies have published written policies describing when forensic genealogy may be used, what approvals are required, how genealogical leads are documented, and how privacy interests are safeguarded throughout the investigative process. Such transparency allows both the scientific community and the public to evaluate whether investigative practices remain consistent with legal and ethical standards. Oversight mechanisms further strengthen accountability. Judicial review, legislative oversight, independent ethics committees, scientific advisory boards, accreditation requirements, and professional standards all contribute to ensuring that forensic genealogy develops responsibly. Because the technology continues evolving, many experts recommend regular review of policies as scientific capabilities, legal precedents, and societal expectations change over time. The international nature of genetic data introduces additional complexity. Genealogy databases may contain participants from multiple countries, each operating under different legal systems governing privacy, consent, and criminal investigations. International cooperation therefore requires careful attention to jurisdictional authority, applicable regulations, and the contractual terms established by genealogy service providers. Harmonizing these differing legal frameworks remains an ongoing challenge as forensic investigations increasingly involve cross-border collaboration. Public opinion regarding forensic genealogy often reflects a balance between two deeply held values. On one hand, many individuals support using advanced forensic methods to identify perpetrators of serious violent crimes, resolve long-standing cold cases, and identify unknown human remains. On the other hand, many also believe that genetic information deserves particularly strong privacy protections because of its uniquely personal and familial nature. Responsible policymaking seeks to acknowledge both perspectives rather than treating them as mutually exclusive. As forensic genetic genealogy continues to mature, its long-term success will depend not only on scientific innovation, but also on sustained public trust. Maintaining that trust requires rigorous scientific standards, transparent investigative procedures, carefully defined legal authority, independent oversight, robust data protection, and ongoing dialogue among scientists, legal experts, policymakers, ethicists, genealogy professionals, and the communities they serve. The evolution of forensic genealogy demonstrates that advances in science are most effective when accompanied by equally thoughtful advances in ethics and governance, ensuring that powerful investigative tools are applied responsibly, proportionately, and with continued respect for both justice and individual rights. For more than 3 decades, short tandem repeat (STANGER) analysis has served as the international standard for forensic DNA identification. It remains the foundation of most criminal DNA databases and has proven highly reliable for comparing biological evidence with known reference samples. However, rapid advances in molecular biology and genomic technology have introduced a new generation of analytical methods capable of examining DNA in far greater detail. These developments, collectively known as next-generation sequencing, NGS, or massively parallel sequencing, MPS, represent one of the most significant technological advances in modern forensic genetics. Traditional forensic DNA analysis examines the length of selected strains within the genome. This approach is extremely effective for individual identification because different people often possess different numbers of repeated DNA sequences at these locations. Yet conventional strain testing provides only part of the available genetic information. Next-generation sequencing expands this capability by determining the precise order of DNA bases adenine, A, thymine, T, cytosine, C, and guanine, G, cross hundreds or even thousands of genetic regions simultaneously. Unlike earlier sequencing methods that analyzed one DNA fragment at a time, NANEGS performs millions of sequencing reactions in parallel. This remarkable increase in throughput allows laboratories to generate enormous amounts of genetic information from a single biological sample. As a result, scientists can examine a much broader portion of the genome while requiring relatively small amounts of starting material. The basic workflow begins with DNA extraction from biological evidence. Once purified, the DNA is fragmented into smaller pieces and prepared for sequencing through a process known as library preparation. During this stage, specialized adapters are attached to DNA fragments so they can be recognized and processed by the sequencing instrument. Depending on the sequencing platform, additional amplification steps may be required before analysis begins. Many sequencing workflows incorporate DNA amplification using the polymerase chain reaction, PCR, before sequencing libraries are analyzed. PCR enables scientists to generate sufficient copies of target DNA regions for reliable sequencing while preserving the limited biological material often encountered in forensic investigations. Once prepared, DNA libraries are loaded onto highly automated sequencing instruments. Unlike traditional capillary electrophoresis systems that primarily measure fragment length, NAGS instruments directly determine the nucleotide sequence of millions of DNA fragments simultaneously. Sophisticated optical systems, fluorescent chemistry, and advanced imaging technologies record each nucleotide incorporated during sequencing. Powerful computer algorithms then reconstruct the complete genetic sequence from billions of individual observations. One of the greatest strengths of next-generation sequencing is its ability to recover additional genetic information from highly degraded biological samples. Crime scene evidence exposed to sunlight, moisture, microorganisms, or long-term environmental conditions often contains fragmented DNA that is difficult to analyze using conventional methods. Because ANGs can sequence relatively short DNA fragments while collecting extensive genetic information, it offers significant potential for improving the analysis of challenging forensic samples. Another important advantage involves mixture interpretation. Biological evidence recovered from crime scenes frequently contains DNA contributed by multiple individuals. Distinguishing these contributors can be difficult when traditional stereoprofiles overlap extensively. Next-generation sequencing provides additional sequence variation beyond fragment length alone, allowing scientists to differentiate some DNA contributors more effectively in complex mixtures. Although interpretation remains scientifically challenging, the expanded genetic information available through sequencing may improve analytical resolution in certain cases. Next-generation sequencing also expands the range of genetic markers available to forensic scientists. In addition to stray markers, laboratories may examine single nucleotide polymorphisms, SEPs, mitochondrial DNA, insertion-deletion polymorphisms, and other informative genetic regions within a single analytical workflow. This flexibility allows researchers to tailor sequencing strategies according to the scientific questions presented by a particular investigation. Single nucleotide polymorphisms, commonly known as SUPs, have become especially important in forensic genetics because they occur throughout the human genome and remain informative even when DNA is highly degraded. Large collections of SUP markers support applications such as ancestry inference, kinship analysis, and investigative genetic genealogy. By analyzing hundreds of thousands of SUPs simultaneously, scientists can estimate biological relationships between individuals separated by several generations, greatly expanding the range of investigative possibilities beyond direct identity comparisons. Another area where AGX demonstrates considerable promise involves mitochondrial DNA analysis. Unlike nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA exists in many copies within each cell, increasing the likelihood of successful recovery from hair shafts, bones, teeth, and other degraded materials. Sequencing complete mitochondrial genomes provides substantially greater discrimination than earlier mitochondrial DNA techniques, while improving the identification of historical remains and challenging biological evidence. The enormous volume of information generated by next-generation sequencing requires sophisticated computational analysis. Bioinformatics has therefore become an essential component of modern forensic genetics. Specialized software performs quality assessment, sequence alignment, variant detection, statistical evaluation, and report generation. Computational scientists work closely with molecular biologists to ensure that analytical pipelines produce accurate, reproducible, and scientifically validated results suitable for forensic applications. Because forensic evidence often becomes part of legal proceedings, rigorous validation remains essential before new sequencing methods are adopted for routine casework. Laboratories evaluate analytical accuracy, sensitivity, reproducibility, contamination control, precision, and statistical reliability through extensive developmental and internal validation studies. Accreditation bodies and professional organizations establish standards governing instrument performance, quality assurance, documentation, and laboratory procedures to ensure consistency among forensic laboratories. Although next-generation sequencing offers many advantages, it has not replaced traditional stray analysis. Conventional stray profiling remains highly effective, cost-efficient, internationally standardized, and fully integrated into existing forensic DNA databases. Instead, many experts view ENIs as a complementary technology that expands forensic capabilities in situations where conventional methods encounter limitations. Future forensic laboratories may increasingly integrate both approaches, selecting the most appropriate analytical method according to the characteristics of each case. Researchers continue exploring new applications for sequencing technologies. Emerging areas include forensic epigenetics, which examines chemical modifications affecting gene regulation, improved analysis of highly degraded ancient DNA, enhanced prediction of biological relationships, microbial forensics, and increasingly sophisticated approaches to interpreting mixed DNA samples. While many of these applications remain active areas of scientific research, they illustrate the expanding role of genomics within forensic science. As sequencing technologies become faster, more accurate, and more affordable, they are expected to play an increasingly important role in forensic investigations worldwide. At the same time, scientists, legal professionals, and policymakers continue emphasizing the importance of maintaining rigorous validation standards, transparent laboratory procedures, independent quality assurance, and appropriate ethical oversight. Technological capability alone does not guarantee reliable forensic evidence. Scientific integrity depends upon careful methodology, reproducible results, and adherence to internationally recognized best practices. The continuing evolution of next-generation DNA sequencing demonstrates how advances in genomics are reshaping forensic science. By enabling the analysis of degraded evidence, expanding the range of genetic markers, improving the interpretation of complex samples, and supporting new investigative applications, ENI has broadened the scientific toolkit available to forensic laboratories. As research progresses and international standards continue to evolve, next-generation sequencing is likely to become an increasingly valuable complement to traditional forensic DNA analysis, helping investigators answer questions that earlier technologies could not address while maintaining the scientific rigor essential to the justice system. The success of a criminal investigation often depends not only on what evidence is discovered, but on how that evidence is preserved from the moment it is found. Every fingerprint, biological sample, fiber, footprint, digital device, or document represents information that may later help reconstruct events, identify individuals, or eliminate investigative possibilities. If evidence is contaminated, damaged, misplaced, or improperly documented, valuable scientific information may be permanently lost. For this reason, evidence preservation has become one of the most carefully regulated and scientifically controlled aspects of modern forensic investigation. Evidence preservation begins long before an item reaches a forensic laboratory. The process starts at the crime scene itself, where the primary objective is to protect the scene from unnecessary disturbance. First responders establish a secure perimeter as soon as practical, restricting access to authorized personnel whose activities can be documented. Every additional person entering a crime scene increases the possibility of introducing contamination or unintentionally altering physical evidence. Careful scene security, therefore, represents the first safeguard in preserving forensic integrity. Once the scene has been secured, investigators conduct a systematic survey before collecting any evidence. The overall condition of the location is documented through notes, photography, videography, sketches, and increasingly, three-dimensional laser scanning or digital mapping technologies. This documentation preserves the original appearance of the scene before individual items are moved. It also allows investigators, forensic scientists, attorneys, and courts to review the scene long after physical access is no longer possible. Photography is one of the most important preservation tools. Investigators typically record wide-angle images showing the overall location, medium-range photographs illustrating the relationship between objects, and close-up images documenting individual items of evidence. Scales or measurement references are often included in close-up photographs to accurately record size. Modern digital imaging systems capture high-resolution photographs while preserving metadata concerning time, date, and camera settings. These visual records provide permanent documentation of the evidence in its original position. Crime scene sketches complement photographic documentation by recording measurements, distances, orientations, and spatial relationships. Whether prepared manually or generated through digital mapping systems, these diagrams assist investigators in reconstructing the scene and understanding how evidence relates to surrounding objects. Increasingly, forensic teams employ laser scanners, photogrammetry, and drone imaging to produce detailed three-dimensional reconstructions that can later be examined from multiple perspectives without altering the original scene. Once documentation is complete, investigators begin collecting physical evidence according to standardized procedures. Each item is handled individually to minimize the possibility of cross-contamination. Disposable gloves are changed frequently. Clean instruments are used whenever appropriate, and collection tools are either sterilized or replaced between samples. Items likely to contain biological material receive particularly careful handling because even minute quantities of foreign DNA may interfere with later laboratory analysis. Biological evidence, including blood, saliva, semen, tissue, hair with attached root material, bones, teeth, and skin cells is often among the most valuable forms of forensic evidence. Such material must be protected from moisture, excessive heat, direct sunlight, and microbial growth that could degrade DNA. Whenever possible, biological samples are allowed to air dry before packaging. Paper containers are frequently preferred over sealed plastic packaging for certain biological evidence because they reduce moisture accumulation that may encourage bacterial growth and DNA degradation. Packaging procedures vary according to the nature of the evidence. Fragile trace materials such as hairs, fibers, paint fragments, glass particles, and gunshot residue require secure containers designed to prevent loss during transportation. Firearms are unloaded and packaged to preserve fingerprints, DNA, and trace evidence while ensuring safe handling. Sharp objects are secured within rigid protective containers to protect both the evidence and laboratory personnel. Electronic devices are packaged to minimize physical damage and, when appropriate, prevent unauthorized remote access or alteration of digital information. Every item receives a unique identifying label. Documentation generally includes the date and time of collection, the exact location where the evidence was found, the name of the investigator who collected it, a brief description of the item, and an evidence identification number. This information accompanies the evidence throughout the investigative process, allowing each item to be accurately tracked from collection through laboratory examination, courtroom presentation, and long-term storage. Central to evidence preservation is the principle known as the chain of custody. The chain of custody is a continuous written and, increasingly, electronic record documenting every individual who has possessed or transferred an item of evidence. Each transfer records the date, time, identities of the individuals involved, and the purpose of the transfer. Maintaining this uninterrupted history helps demonstrate that the evidence presented in court is the same evidence originally collected at the crime scene and has not been altered, substituted, or mishandled. Transportation presents another important stage in evidence preservation. During transport, investigators protect evidence from environmental conditions that could affect its integrity. Certain biological samples may require refrigerated or frozen storage. Chemical evidence may require specialized hazardous material handling procedures. Digital storage devices are protected from physical shock, electromagnetic interference, and unauthorized access. Secure transportation protocols reduce the risk of accidental damage while maintaining documented chain of custody procedures. Upon arrival at the forensic laboratory, evidence is formally received into secure evidence management systems. Laboratory personnel verify packaging integrity, confirm documentation, assign laboratory identifiers, and store items under conditions appropriate to their scientific characteristics. Biological evidence may be refrigerated or frozen. Firearms are stored within secure vaults. Controlled substances, explosives, and hazardous materials receive specialized storage according to safety regulations. Access to evidence storage areas is typically restricted to authorized personnel through electronic security systems, surveillance cameras, and controlled entry procedures. Long-term preservation has become increasingly important as forensic technology continues to evolve. Evidence collected decades earlier may later be re-examined using analytical techniques unavailable at the time of collection. Consequently, many agencies maintain dedicated evidence repositories with environmental controls designed to preserve biological material, trace evidence, documents, and digital media for extended periods. Decisions regarding evidence retention are governed by legal requirements, agency policies, and the nature of the criminal investigation. Digital evidence presents unique preservation challenges. Computers, smartphones, surveillance systems, cloud-based records, wearable devices, and vehicle electronics contain vast amounts of potentially relevant information. Digital forensic specialists create verified forensic copies, often called forensic images, that preserve the original data while allowing investigators to conduct examinations without altering the source device. Cryptographic hash values verify that copied data remain identical to the original throughout the investigative process. Quality assurance underlies every aspect of evidence preservation. Standard operating procedures, accreditation requirements, regular training, equipment maintenance, internal audits, and external proficiency testing help ensure consistency among investigators and laboratories. Documentation allows independent review of every step in the evidence handling process, supporting both scientific reliability and judicial transparency. Emerging technologies continue improving evidence preservation practices. Electronic evidence management systems reduce documentation errors, barcode and radio frequency identification technologies enhance inventory control, automated environmental monitoring protects sensitive biological samples, and digital case management systems improve coordination among investigators, laboratories, and prosecutors. Three-dimensional documentation technologies preserve increasingly accurate representations of crime scenes, while advances in packaging materials further reduce contamination risks. Ultimately, evidence preservation serves a broader purpose than supporting laboratory analysis. It safeguards the integrity of the entire criminal justice process. Properly preserved evidence allows forensic scientists to perform reliable examinations, enables investigators to reconstruct events accurately, assists courts in evaluating scientific findings, and helps ensure that conclusions rest upon verifiable physical facts rather than speculation. As forensic science continues advancing, careful evidence preservation remains the essential foundation upon which every subsequent scientific analysis depends, ensuring that today's evidence retains its value for tomorrow's investigative technologies. The ability to recover a DNA profile from biological evidence is only the beginning of forensic analysis. Equally important is determining what that profile means. Modern forensic genetics relies heavily on statistics because DNA evidence is fundamentally probabilistic rather than absolute. A laboratory may conclude that two DNA profiles are consistent with originating from the same individual, but the scientific weight of that conclusion depends on carefully calculated statistical measures. These calculations help investigators and courts evaluate how strongly the DNA evidence supports one explanation over another. One of the most common misconceptions about forensic DNA is the idea of a 100% match. In reality, forensic scientists do not express DNA evidence in absolute terms. Instead, they calculate the probability that another unrelated person from a relevant population would share the observed genetic profile. This statistical framework allows experts to communicate both the strength and the limitations of the evidence while avoiding unsupported claims of certainty. Most forensic laboratories perform DNA identification using short tandem repeat stranger markers. Each stranger location contains repeating DNA sequences inherited from an individual's biological parents. Because many string markers are examined simultaneously, the combination of genetic characteristics becomes highly distinctive. However, the frequency of each genetic variant differs among populations, making population genetics an essential component of statistical interpretation. Population genetics examines how frequently particular genetic variants occur within large populations. Scientists develop allele frequency databases by analyzing DNA samples from many unrelated individuals representing diverse ancestral backgrounds. These databases provide estimates of how common or rare each observed genetic marker is within the population. When multiple string markers are combined, the overall rarity of the complete DNA profile can be calculated using established statistical methods. One frequently reported statistic is the random match probability, RMP. The RMP estimates the probability that a randomly selected, unrelated individual from the relevant population would coincidentally possess the same DNA profile as the evidence sample. Extremely small probabilities indicate that the observed DNA profile is highly uncommon. It is important to understand, however, that the RMP does not measure the probability that a particular individual is guilty or innocent. Instead, it quantifies how unusual the DNA profile is within the reference population. Another statistical framework increasingly used in forensic science involves likelihood ratios, LLSS. Rather than asking how rare a DNA profile is, a likelihood ratio compares to competing explanations for the evidence. One hypothesis may propose that the DNA originated from a particular individual, while an alternative hypothesis may propose that it originated from an unknown, unrelated person. The likelihood ratio expresses how much more strongly the observed DNA evidence supports one hypothesis relative to the other. This approach is particularly useful when interpreting complex DNA mixtures involving multiple contributors. Complex biological mixtures present unique statistical challenges. Crime scene samples frequently contain DNA from several individuals. Determining which genetic markers belong to which contributor can be difficult, especially when contributors share similar genetic characteristics or when one contributor is represented by only a small amount of DNA. Modern laboratories increasingly employ probabilistic genotyping software to assist with these analyses. These computational systems evaluate thousands or even millions of possible contributor combinations according to validated statistical models, providing likelihood ratios that quantify the relative support for competing explanations. The reliability of statistical interpretation depends upon both laboratory quality and population data. Analytical errors, contamination, degraded samples, and incomplete DNA profiles can influence statistical calculations if not carefully managed. Consequently, forensic laboratories implement rigorous quality assurance procedures, independent technical review, instrument validation, and standardized operating protocols to ensure that statistical conclusions remain scientifically reliable. Degraded DNA presents another important consideration. Biological material exposed to environmental conditions may produce only partial DNA profiles because some genetic markers fail to amplify successfully. Partial profiles generally contain less information than complete profiles, reducing their statistical power. Nevertheless, even incomplete DNA profiles may contribute valuable investigative information when interpreted appropriately within their scientific limitations. Closely related individuals also require careful statistical consideration. Biological relatives share substantially more genetic material than unrelated people. As a result, the probability that siblings, parents, and children, or other close relatives possess similar DNA profiles is much greater than for unrelated individuals. Forensic scientists account for these biological relationships when appropriate, ensuring that statistical interpretations accurately reflect the possibility of related contributors. Another important concept involves match thresholds and reporting standards. Laboratories establish validated criteria defining the minimum quality and quantity of DNA data required before reporting a comparison. These standards help prevent overinterpretation of weak or ambiguous results. Independent technical review further ensures that reported conclusions are supported by both the laboratory data and accepted scientific methodology. Statistical interpretation also plays a critical role during courtroom testimony. Expert witnesses explain not only the laboratory findings but also the meaning of the associated statistics. They distinguish between the probability of observing the DNA evidence under competing hypotheses and broader legal questions that remain the responsibility of judges and juries. This distinction is essential because scientific evidence addresses biological questions, whereas legal decisions require evaluation of all available evidence within the context of applicable law. International scientific organizations have developed comprehensive recommendations governing statistical interpretation. Professional guidelines emphasize transparency, reproducibility, validated analytical methods, appropriate population databases, documentation of assumptions, and clear communication of uncertainty. These principles help ensure that DNA statistics are applied consistently across forensic laboratories and judicial systems. Advances in computational biology continue improving statistical interpretation. Modern probabilistic software integrates sophisticated mathematical models capable of evaluating increasingly complex DNA evidence while reducing subjective interpretation. Researchers are also investigating machine learning techniques, improved population models, and enhanced methods for quantifying uncertainty. Despite these technological advances, human expertise remains essential for reviewing analytical results, evaluating laboratory quality, and interpreting findings within the broader investigative context. The interpretation of forensic DNA evidence ultimately demonstrates that science is not simply about obtaining data, is about understanding what the data mean. Statistical methods transform laboratory observations into scientifically meaningful conclusions by measuring the strength of genetic evidence rather than asserting absolute certainty. This probabilistic approach reflects one of the defining characteristics of modern forensic science: rigorous analysis supported by transparent methodology, validated mathematics, careful quality assurance, and objective communication of both the power and the limitations of scientific evidence. Together, these principles allow DNA evidence to contribute reliably to criminal investigations while maintaining the scientific integrity upon which forensic genetics depends. Artificial intelligence has emerged as one of the most transformative technologies of the 21st century, influencing fields ranging from medicine and finance to transportation and scientific research. In forensic science, AI is increasingly viewed not as a replacement for investigators or laboratory scientists, but as a sophisticated tool capable of processing vast amounts of information, recognizing complex patterns, and assisting experts in making more informed decisions. As forensic investigations continue to generate larger and more diverse datasets, artificial intelligence offers new opportunities to improve efficiency, enhance accuracy, and support scientific analysis while maintaining rigorous human oversight. At its core, artificial intelligence refers to computer systems designed to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence, such as pattern recognition, classification, prediction, and decision support. Most forensic AI applications rely on machine learning, a branch of AI in which algorithms learn from large collections of data rather than following only fixed, pre-programmed instructions. By identifying recurring statistical relationships within validated datasets, machine learning models can assist forensic professionals in analyzing information that would otherwise require enormous amounts of manual review. One of the earliest areas where AI demonstrated significant potential was digital forensics. Modern investigations often involve enormous quantities of digital evidence, including computers, smartphones, surveillance systems, cloud storage, wearable devices, vehicle data recorders, and social media archives. A single investigation may contain millions of documents, photographs, videos, messages, and system logs. AI-assisted software can rapidly organize these materials, identify duplicate files, classify document types, detect relevant keywords, and prioritize information for human investigators. Rather than replacing detailed examination, these systems help experts focus their attention on the most significant evidence. Image analysis represents another rapidly developing application. Computer vision algorithms can assist in enhancing low-quality surveillance footage, identifying objects, comparing images, and detecting subtle visual patterns that may not be immediately apparent during manual examination. Modern systems can stabilize video recordings, reduce digital noise, improve contrast, and assist with frame-by-frame analysis, while preserving original evidence through documented forensic workflows. Human examiners remain responsible for verifying all conclusions, but AI can substantially reduce the time required for initial review. Fingerprint examination has also benefited from advances in artificial intelligence. Automated fingerprint identification systems have existed for decades, but modern machine learning techniques improve the ability to compare partial or low-quality fingerprint impressions against large databases. AI algorithms can identify candidate matches with remarkable speed, allowing fingerprint examiners to evaluate the highest-ranked possibilities rather than manually reviewing thousands of records. Importantly, final identification decisions continue to require expert human evaluation and established verification procedures. Artificial intelligence is increasingly being explored within forensic biology and DNA analysis as well. AI-assisted computational tools may help laboratories evaluate complex DNA mixtures, monitor instrument performance, detect analytical anomalies, optimize laboratory workflows, and support quality assurance programs. Machine learning algorithms are also being investigated for improving the interpretation of degraded biological samples and assisting with statistical modeling. These applications aim to enhance consistency and efficiency while maintaining rigorous scientific validation. Crime scene documentation is another area undergoing technological transformation. Three-dimensional laser scanning, drone imaging, photogrammetry, and digital mapping systems generate highly detailed reconstructions of crime scenes. AI software can assist by automatically recognizing objects, measuring spatial relationships, organizing photographic records, and generating searchable digital models. Investigators may later revisit these virtual reconstructions without disturbing the original scene, improving both investigative review and courtroom presentation. Artificial intelligence also has significant potential in forensic pathology. Researchers are evaluating AI systems capable of assisting with medical image analysis, histological examination, injury documentation, and postmortem imaging. Machine learning models may help identify subtle anatomical patterns, classify tissue characteristics, or support diagnostic consistency. However, medical conclusions remain the responsibility of qualified forensic pathologists whose expertise, clinical judgment, and comprehensive examination extend well beyond algorithmic analysis. In forensic chemistry, AI is being applied to the interpretation of complex analytical data generated by instruments such as gas chromatography mass spectrometry, GCMS, liquid chromatography mass spectrometry, LCMs, infrared spectroscopy, and Raman spectroscopy. These techniques produce large quantities of chemical information that can be difficult to interpret manually. AI-assisted software can recognize recurring spectral patterns, classify unknown compounds, detect anomalies, and accelerate laboratory workflows while maintaining standardized analytical procedures. The integration of artificial intelligence into forensic science also supports quality management. Laboratories generate extensive documentation covering instrument calibration, maintenance records, proficiency testing, reagent quality control, evidence tracking, and analytical validation. AI systems can assist in monitoring these processes by identifying irregularities, predicting equipment maintenance needs, detecting documentation inconsistencies, and supporting compliance with accreditation standards. Such applications